supports, records, and promotes free speech. I now invite Mishi Choudhary, founder SFLC.in, to give her opening remarks and launch the tracker. Mishi, over to you.
Thank you, Gyan. Can you all hear me, see me? Am I still muted or doing whatever we do on Zoom? Or thank you everybody for making time. And uh, I think it's good evening for most of you where you are. Some of us are in different time zones, and I thank all of you who've gotten up. Rachael, Elonnai, the excitement of a new kid, of a new project, I think it never wanes. When something you have imagined for a long time and it becomes tangible and you can see it, the sense of purpose, I think, is heightened. And that's how I'm feeling at this launch. I've also not slept, so maybe it's the adrenaline. So if I'm making any errors, please blame it on the lack of sleep. Obviously, because I'm perfect and I never make any errors otherwise. You would think that I actually purposefully designed to get my Twitter account, my only social media account, suspended on the eve of this launch because I really wanted to make a very strong point about free speech and expression. But what can I say? I'm a lucky woman. My Twitter account was suspended yesterday. My great team told me about the fact that I have somehow flouted the rules of X, and maybe the gods that may be, if they have time to actually pay attention, will tell me why it has been done so. But it's a perfect moment. About the relationship that people have, the people's freedom to read, write, speak, listen, and have political liberty, an idea that Thomas Jefferson and the French revolutionaries tried in some ways to institutionalize. Though in practice, all governments confine their enemies and reward their friends, I think about that idea is what this is all about. The mass media that grew up in the course of the 20th century, and some of us are at least a little older and saw the end of the 20th century, perhaps. Now, that mass media that grew up in its course, they were in between. They were the media, and they were in between was generally what they were negotiating was it was understood to be the life of citizens and the life of a nation. Now, what we experience is something which it feels sort of like that. And we are still using the same vocabulary about free speech, about free expression, about freedom of press. But that's not really accurate. Because what has happened is that now the media has become more than just the message. They have become the mind. The way that some people's technology is put together, and those people mostly sit in Silicon Valley, and those people's technology governs the thought and expression and political freedom of billions of other people. These are not state entities, but have become servants of state entities. Of course, I'm talking about the tech companies. In the beginning, they tried to take on the mantle of free press in free society. The picture of the press that the American press, at its height in the era of Pentagon Papers, tried to present itself as a private force independent of government in favor of public information. They can't do that. That delusion has failed. They are now seem to be what they are. They scrape data from everywhere to feed their hungry AI models. They scrape human consciousness and they create opportunities to sell human attention, and they truckle to governments. Because any thought that they were going to be this great counterweight to government oppression has disappeared in the ordinary course of neoliberal time, as their profit-seeking motivations has caused them to take a perfectly reasonable position that if they get an order from the government, which looks official and that comes from a thing that looks like the government, they obey that order. The consequence of which is now we have a regime in which power of software is turned into power over money and power over people. And that's why the categories that we use, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the freedom of thought, they need to be comprehensively rethought and reimagined in order to avoid the belief that government is the primary agent that expresses itself directly through censorship. And the private parties are primarily somehow acting in public interest by disseminating information and learning the truth. But we can't even talk about these paradigm shifts yet because we really don't understand how our own systems work. In India, officially, there is no data. There is no data on COVID deaths. There is no data on internet shutdowns. There is no data on several other factors. Of course, with respect to questions of disinformation, manipulation of public influence, everyone is learning that there is something immense, some immense amount of activity that is going on. But none of us understands what that is. It's simpler and more basic to try to actually understand how people are deprived of the opportunity to speak, to listen, to read, to know, and to learn. So that's why here we are, just trying to collect that information and disseminate an understanding that will allow us to frame those new questions and the new politics of this time. The way that our order of culture now works also depends on the online world, even with respect of everything that circulates in the offline world. One of our guests would be able to speak about it because they have been doing something which is very important to us, offline and online circulation of books. The relationship between the individual and the culture is now mediated by the neuron, that is the smart ass phone in your pocket. That's why we're going to talk about this tracker, and that's why we decided to start this project. It is sometimes called the Free Speech Tracker 2.0, mostly because I have ideas, and then there are much more smarter people I work with, and they make it into tangible things. The first time around, obviously, I did a shoddy job. The second time around, they did the right job, and that's why we are here. So I'm very, very delighted that all of you have joined us. I'm very delighted that we have started the first step to reimagine the politics, the policy, and where we are going. And thank you all for joining. And we hope that this is the first step we take in terms of gathering of information that helps others to make the changes we are looking forward to. Over to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mishi. If you could also please launch the tracker. I'll request Orient to share his screen and take us through the.
Sure, I'm just sharing my screen. Give me a minute. Thank you. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So Mishi, if you allow me to click on launch button, then yeah, it would
Okay,
be very.
Arendra, I have decided not to allow you actually to do any such thing here. You're very kind. Go ahead and please go ahead and launch the tracker. We've been waiting for this for a very long time, and now it's in your
Thank you.
hands.
Thank you so much. So now here is our new tracker, and over to Gyan and Mishi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mishi. Thanks, Orient. Now I will provide our attendees a brief walkthrough of our tracker. I'm very excited to take you through our free speech tracker. As you can see, we have opted for an old newspaper look, which has inspired the font style and how we present information here. We have categorized free speech violations into four broad themes: books, art, website bans, and restrictive social media policies. These themes can easily be navigated from the homepage. Researchers and users can also contribute to the initiative and report free speech violations by using the Report a Ban button. Clicking on this button will open up a short form that people can use to share information easily. You can also navigate the four thematic categories from the navigation ribbon. To read or not takes you to our book ban section. Reading the fine print explores restrictive social media policies. Lights, camera, banned discusses art bans. And 404, website not found, examines website and application bans. Throughout the website, we have used various interactive elements to make it intuitive for researchers, lawyers, academicians, and citizens to engage with this resource. Orind, if you can have the next slide.
Yes, I'm on the next slide.
The next slide, please.
Hello, can you see my screen? I'm on the next slide. If you can see, sorry.
Can you please skip to the next slide?
Oh, sorry.
And the next one. Thanks. For example, this graph maps 72 banned books, the reason and the year of banning. If you hover over the book covers, you will see information about each book that was banned. Similarly, this graph, Orin, can you have the next slide? Yeah, thanks. Similarly, this graph shows the reason for which the books are banned, mentioned on the y-axis, and the law used as provided by the legend below. In the graph on the right, you can see the initiating authority on the right-hand side and who it was aimed at on the left. Information under the free speech tracker is available under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike license. So all of our data sets for the free speech tracker can also be downloaded by students, researchers, and rights activists globally by simply clicking on Download Our Dataset button. You can also reach out to us, take action, spread the message, and contribute code through the links on the Contact Us page. SFLC.in is a donor-supported organization, and you can also donate to us through the modes listed on the page. Of course, this was only a glimpse of our tracker. I invite you to dive deeper and discover more. Thank you, and back to you, Mishi.
Thank you very much, Gyan. I hope you will all engage with the tracker and give us an opportunity to actually add what's missing here, because right now it starts with a few categories, but it necessarily needs more and more stuff to be added here. And as we are looking at things which are happening in the world, unfortunately, we are going to be given a lot more data in terms of what is censored and what is not censored here. Now, I think what we are going to do is, because as I said, that I'm not as very smart, but the biggest learning I've had in my life is to surround myself with smarter people. That's why we put together this panel where people have had real life experiences dealing with various aspects of how this right is expressed around the world. They engage with various stakeholders and then try to bring more freedom with their activities. Some of them are using words to bring more justice in the world. The others are helping spread other people's ideas here. I am very, very excited to introduce you to our panelists. The first one here I'm going to introduce is to Ms. Indira Jaising. I'm going to do a little bit of a fangirl moment here. I don't think you grow up in India and go to law school and don't think of Ms. Jaising and her activities, especially if you're a woman and you want inspiration and you want to see what you can become or who you can be in this world. There is no day which goes about where you haven't imagined yourself as Ms. Jaising. I went to law school many years ago. I've seen her in practice. I've seen what she has built. And over my lifetime, I have met so many people who are doing amazing things, whose life she has touched. There is, of course, a Wikipedia page, a big biography where she has many firsts to her name. But all I'm going to say is thank you for inspiring all of us and several generations of lawyers to bring justice in the world using our law license. Very, very warm welcome to you, ma'am, and thank you for joining us. I also understand that you have to leave a little early, so we will then go first with you. We also have joining, Ms. Jaising spends a lot of time in the Supreme Court representing clients. And we have Rachita of the Sanitary panels, who has also a lot of great things to her credit. What she has done, again, please do read the Wikipedia pages of all our panelists or Google them and find out about these biographies they have, which are really, really long, and I'm not going to bore you with those. But Rachita has had a great other stint with our Supreme Court. And her voice has been so strong that the keeper of our rights also had to react and then be this, oh my God, we have to take note of it and then tell you how powerful we are. So we will hear from Rachita how she uses her comic voice to bring more justice in the world. Ravi Deecee has been a publisher and bringing other people's voices, plus his own voice also, dealing with something which we should have already addressed. But who cares? It is the 21st century. We must ban books, whether it is in Florida, in Texas, or in India. We must continue to do such a thing and make Ravi's life very, very difficult. So here he is joining us to talk about that as well. Then my dear friend Elonnai is joining us from Global Network Initiative. Elonnai has had an amazing life, decided to spend some time with us in India, and now has been around the world talking to platform companies and does not have, it has the unenviable job to make all stakeholders work together. We sometimes hate each other, we sometimes love each other, but Elonnai tries to make us work together. And last but not the least is Rachael K., my very, very dear friend from IFEX, and a fantastic human being who has been enabling various organizations for past 25 years around the world to bring their voices in the forefront. And it doesn't matter whether you are in Palestine or you're in Malaysia or you are in India or you are in Europe or you are in the Caribbean, when Rachael is not competing in rugby with her daughter or also looking fabulous in Carnival, Rachael is actually really helping us understand our rights. So I'm very excited today to have all of you join at this launch. The format is I'm going to try to be a little strict, mostly not because I don't love all these people and would like them to talk forever, but because their time is limited. We're going to start with opening statements with each of the panelists speaking for 3 minutes. I'll remind you very early on with a 15 seconds warning that the time is running out. But after the opening statements, I will pose questions. And as I said, Ms. Jaising has to leave early, which she had intimated to us early on. So we'll start with her. And after a few questions, we'll have some time for audience interaction. I would love for all of you to put questions in the chat, and then perhaps you can speak as well. So without further ado, Ms. Jaising, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can. Yes,
well,
we can.
Okay. Well, to begin with, thank you very much for your very highly complimentary comments about me, but I will not waste time on that. You and I can talk about them separately. The only thing I'll say is yes, given that I'm the oldest person on this panel, I've seen enough of the legal profession, enough of the judiciary to be able to take a lot of, what shall I say, rubbish coming my way from the courts, from judgments, and one has learned over time to deal with issues like this. So thank you. All I wish to say in the opening statement is that ever since I can remember, I have worn more than one hat. And the primary one, of course, is being a lawyer in the legal profession. But side by side with being in the legal profession, I have always loved writing about the law. And I remember a comment made by one of my friends, and he said, every professional has to be a good journalist as well, because they have to communicate the content of their profession to the world at large, and that requires journalistic skills. And somehow for me, it has come naturally. Writing and working in a court of law has come naturally. And this is the reason why all laws relating to freedom of speech and expression have always been like a thorn in my skin. At every stage in life, you find you're being told this speech is acceptable and not that, and so on and so forth. But one has learned how to deal with that and overcome it. I will just like to stop my opening statement by saying I'm not a technological expert. So this little interaction is going to be very challenging for me. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. I don't think you need to be a technological expert, and you're an expert enough to tell the courts that rule of law means that people should be able to see and what is happening in these courts. And you made that possible, and you brought technology in the Supreme Court. So I don't think the expertise is a challenge. I will say that because you didn't use all of your time, I would use that opportunity to ask the questions to you, just so that you can also make it for your other meeting. We used to think that right of free speech and open debate was going to act as safety valve, and it would allow this substantial disagreement where people could express it in a peaceful manner instead of turning into violence. But in the current environment, free speech has somehow created a lot more social conflict. People feel very free to use that opportunity to create that conflict, to amplify it, and it enables others to insult and incite hatred, and marginalize some people as well. How do you see that changing? And in terms of India, which has had a widespread use of technology, but also the size of the population, but a past record of successful model of multi-ethnic democracy, what happened or what is happening in India?
Thank you for that question. We are at a specific moment in history, aren't we? And we've just gone over the cusp of the 2024 election. And the only after 10 years of being in what I believe to be a rule of autocracy. Let me not use words like that. Let me just say the rule of law was seriously eroded, in my opinion, over the last 10 years. Now we've come out of an election of 2024. And I, for one, was very, very pleased with the results, because I think it showed the basic democratic content of ordinary people of this country. I believe it's not the political parties that won this election. I believe it's you and I that won this election from outside the political parties. So there is an opposition in this country which is not located inside political parties. That's the first point. The second point, of course, is it's a worldwide phenomenon. It doesn't seem to be confined only to India. One has seen this phenomenon in different parts of the world. In fact, there are some really interesting books I'm reading right now on the subject. And one of them is Naomi Klein's book, where she's trying to understand how people swing from being on the left to being on the right. It's a phenomenon I have not completely understood. But I will say this, that because there is a basic instinct to speak out, which I would say is a survival instinct. And I have been saying that we who represent the marginalized sections of society, we do not have anything in our hands as a tool. We don't have lobbyists. We don't have people in parliament. We don't have people who are sitting in parliamentary committees. We are not able to bribe people, but we do have our voice. And that's where freedom of speech and expression comes into the picture. And people in this country do exercise their right to freedom of speech and expression. Now come to the second part of your question. What has happened to this right? Yes, this right has been sought to be crushed through a process of abuse of the process of law, through an erosion of the rule of law. We have seen it happening in this country, especially, as you say, in a country which is multi-ethnic, and because the country itself is trying to take a turn towards being a non-secular country, if I may put it, politely. However, I would like to inform you that from my perspective, these attacks on the right to freedom of speech and expression have not gone unchallenged. And one particular challenge, which, if you like, I can tell you right now or tell you a little later about, is a challenge which we did on behalf of the Leaflet, a digital media house which I co-founded, which talks about legal opinions. Now, we took the court, we took the government of India to court over the regulations under the IT Act, which said that we are bound by the Code of Ethics under the Press Council of India Act. And I'm happy to report that an interim order of the High Court of Bombay, they said, if you do this, it's going to crush the freedom of speech and expression. And they stayed the operation of that particular rule. I would like to stop here to see what you have to say.
Okay, great. I have a lot to ask, but I'm also a little cognizant of your time. And I'm just going to take the liberty to ask you one more question before we move, so that we get. You've been dealing with a lot of court actions, and thank you for informing us about this one, because we are constantly seeing the weaponization of the IT rules, which are subordinate legislation, happening to bring or take away and shrink the space for a lot of folks who have moved to other spaces when the mainstream space has been denied to them. I want to understand a little bit in terms of what do you think surveillance, how that impacts the right of free expression, and what are the other things the activists, the lawyers, and other strategies can do to address the current state of affairs?
Thank you again for that question. I will answer the second part of it before the first, and I will be a little personal over here. As many of you know, that I happen to be one of the people who has been at the receiving end of this, not only surveillance, I would say it goes beyond surveillance. Ultimately, there was NFR registered against the organization which I founded, the Lawyers Collective, which is still going on. And so I have firsthand experience of what it means to be under surveillance and to be taken to a criminal court for that reason. Now, the first thing I want to say, I was asked this question also, how are lawyers handling, are the lawyers not depressed? Because the attack seems to be on lawyers as well. And I read somewhere that, soon enough, the lawyers are going to be under attack, and many of them have been, because we are frontline defenders of human rights activists. So this is something that we should have expected. In my case, it came in a very unexpected manner, but I quickly reoriented myself to deal with it, took the matter to court, got a stay of arrest, and that's how I'm out here, handling my profession and before you. So the first thing I want to say is that we as lawyers are not depressed by these attacks, okay? Nor are we deterred by these attacks. And I think the reason is because the legal profession enjoys a certain autonomy from structures of power. Okay, I'm not suggesting that the legal profession is not powerful. It is a very powerful profession, but it also has a relative autonomy. In other words, we are not embedded in any institutions, or except, of course, those who appear for the government of India. But as defense lawyers, we are not embedded in structures of power. And so we do have a relative autonomy in relation to this. So the answer to the second part of your question is that it is that we fight on, okay, and we have law in our hands, which in my opinion is a very, very powerful tool. I have to put this on record. I have always said that it's a very powerful tool. After all, the law allows you to speak up inside a courtroom, right? What you and I are discussing in this meeting is something that I can discuss inside a courtroom in my capacity as a lawyer. And that, I can assure you, is a enormously powerful thing to happen. So one suggestion I would have is do not allow any attack to go unchallenged. The very act of challenging it is an act of empowerment. Now, in answer to the first question, the first part of your question is a little more difficult because you said, what is the impact of surveillance? I do regret to say that surveillance does have a kind of a chilling effect on free speech. And there is a tendency to, if we are very honest with ourselves, we will realize that there is a tendency to self-censor yourself when you know that you're under surveillance. And we have seen in India the whole unfolding of Pegasus, which was implanted on our phones. I have many friends who've had Pegasus on their phone. Now, I would say none of us gave up. None of the people I know who had been attacked by Pegasus gave up and continued. But I know, for example, that I, as a publisher, when I get an article coming in from somebody, I do screen it very, very carefully to make sure about 2 or 3 things to the extent possible. 1, that there is no fake news in it. 2, that there is no plagiarism. 3, that there would be no defamation coming at me. And 4, that there would be no contempt of court. So all these things do have a chilling effect. Now, you may say this is due diligence as a publisher, but under the umbrella of a surveillance state, it does have a kind of chilling effect. I'm just being very honest with you.
Thank you very much for telling us, of course, putting on record the power we have as lawyers. As I said, not only inspiring in the beginning, but also giving the courage to move on and continue to do this work. I'm going to move to Rachael for her opening statement.
Before I take your permission to leave, I would like to thank you to be among such a distinguished panel. And I know that you're recording it, and I assure you that I will revisit this meeting once I have the recorded information available. And I would love to personally get in touch with anybody or any one of you that would be willing to meet. That would be a sheer pleasure. So my apologies for leaving this meeting in such a hurry. Thank you.
Thank you for your generosity. You're all connected on email, but we will definitely share the recording of the event. And I think this is, as it's the first event in a series of events, this is also going to help us continue our fight. And hopefully some of those fights we will do together. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am. Rachael, if I may ask you to make your opening statement, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the feeling is mutual. I'm so pleased to be invited to participate today in the launch of the Free Speech Tracker. SFLC is a very valued member of IFEX's global network that promotes and defends freedom of expression, and a crucial stakeholder in protecting freedom of expression in India at a time of great pressure. And I have to say, huge congratulations on the launch. I know all too well the challenges of putting something like this together. It's an incredible accomplishment. I often refer to these types of projects as birthing a child. Across the IFEX membership of IFEX, we see the vital role of monitoring mechanisms such as the Free Speech Tracker in collecting accurate and reliable data with which authorities can be held to account and perpetrators of violations against freedom of expression brought to justice. And we were just speaking about the importance of taking these things to the law, to a courtroom when necessary. These mechanisms also provide a vital overview of the comparative protections afforded to freedom of expression by region and country, which in turn enables advocacy for specific attention and resources to be allocated to the very important role in protecting human rights in the region and globally. The crowdsourced research of SFLC.in also reflects the broader innovations that free expression organizations around the world are making to both the collection of data and the use of this data in advocacy. Within the IFEX network alone, we're seeing examples such as crowdsourced data being used by members in mapping media freedom in the European Union, where journalists across the region can directly report violations and internet shutdowns, and in turn provides a large set of data which feeds directly into the European Commission. In Latin America, IFEX members in Argentina and Colombia have live trackers of attacks against journalists, which addresses previous delays in the publication of data and ensures transparency around the latest figures. In Palestine, which you mentioned earlier, Mishi, member Hamle's platform monitors digital rights violations, and this data has been instrumental in documenting online human rights violations, including hate speech against Palestinians. In Nigeria, IFEX member Simeso is monitoring and analyzing freedom of expression information trends around crises and conflict, as well as offering technical training in digital literacy as part of this to enhance accuracy and relatability of information in the context of mis and disinformation. And last but not least, several IFEX members in Southeast Asia have established a regional database to monitor attacks against journalists and media workers that initiates an early warning system enabling targeted and time-sensitive responses to such violations. I think it's clear that there really is a wealth that can be done with such an incredible tool. So looking forward to continuing the conversation with the rest of the esteemed panel, and I'll hand it back to you, Mishi.
Very good. With 6 seconds to go, I think we're going to move to Ravi. Ravi, your opening statement, please.
We also do an event called the Kerala Literature Festival, actually, that has come into the attention of the politicians. I mean, it brings a lot of trouble to us usually with the Kerala Literature Festival as well. And one thing with Deecee books in the last 50 years is actually, though it's not a ban, actually, we get a lot of issues happening with the publishing of books. The very reason being probably about a few years back with Mustache. It's one of the books actually which I'll discuss during the course of the discussion actually. So basically what we come across actually, I don't know whether I fit into this group actually, but as far as the publishing is concerned, we have been fighting for the last 50 years actually. I mean, not once, not twice, probably almost a dozen times actually with the power structure, with the politicians, with the religion or whatsoever, in terms of fiction, whatever we do actually. I mean, so this is what we are about actually. And during the time of emergency, we had the Kisa Kusika, or recent times of Mustache, or from the local governments actually. So the book industry is always comes under threat when it moves either to the extreme right or to the extreme left actually. This is what I think I'll discuss more during the discussions actually. I mean, rather than the introduction part. I hope it's okay.
Absolutely. It's all as you see fit. Rachita, if we may have your opening statement, please.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel really bad because Jaising ma'am, like I also wanted to fangirl over Jaising ma'am. So ma'am, if you're seeing this recording, thank you so much. You're an inspiration. But I will also go meet her. But yeah, I'm very happy to be a part of this panel. What I want to talk about is slightly different from laws and frameworks. So I feel like in the past 10 years, the understanding of what is acceptable has shrunk rapidly. So, what a news reporter can say has been limited. What a hero in Bollywood looks like has been limited. What you can say on the internet, what you can say on a family WhatsApp group, everything has kind of been restricted. And to the extent that we're now monitoring ourselves, like Jaising ma'am also briefly mentioned about self-censorship and surveillance, we keep monitoring ourselves and what we think and what we're about to say because we're worried about the consequences. And this is a very smart system because it's not an accident. It's a very smart way for us to sort of be put in place and put in check. So, for example, as a cartoonist, as a political cartoonist in our community, we have seen that, if you open our DMs, if you go through our comment section, you'll see the kind of vitriol we face just for stating facts or stating our opinions about what's happening around us. And that's all a systemic, manufactured, it's a very deliberate setup. And so whether it's censorship in form of these systemic ways like harassment online and trolling, or threats of legal action, which, I can talk to personally because I have a contempt of court case going on against me since 2020. These things, sort of affect how much you feel like you can and can't say. So it's it's like, imagine there's a tiny little Sangi guy sitting in your head and sort of telling you, don't say that online, don't think that, don't eat that, don't go there, don't do this. And it's starting to get so much more specific. Like, if you don't support Adani, you're anti-national, you're not patriotic. If you don't buy Patanjali, then you are not patriotic. If you eat beef, you are not patriotic. Like, it's almost absurdist, which makes it hard for political artists to actually even make comics about it, because it's all so bizarre already. So I think this fear is the final form of the censorship. After seeing enough examples of dissenters being jailed, or people being lynched, or if you're speaking up, your employer will fire you, or a film being censored or a book being censored. Like, we see all of these examples, and these Sangis just get more comfortable in our brain, right? They're making a nicer, cozier home in our brain, telling us what to do. So I feel like it's important to fight for free speech on all of these fronts, because censorship is all around us, and these systems that bring us this fear need to be dismantled. And oftentimes we talk about free speech, like, this person has been thrown in jail, political prisoners, UAPA, people saying, shrinking civil society spaces. All of this is fine, but these are all means to an end. It is all to create one people that believe in one thing and agree with the leader and follow one religion. And so, what is the end goal? The end goal is to make these subservient followers. And that's kind of the battle that we need to think about in terms of censorship.
Thank you, Rachita. Very much reminiscent of what we used to read about in authoritarian regimes, how families and neighbors were keeping a watch on everyone, and how that creeps in slowly in our daily lives. For those of you who are not in India, WhatsApp runs India, it is a very important form of communication. And that also tells you how important it becomes in terms of controlling the thought, the access to information, and how people express themselves. Elonnai, you've been dealing with a bunch of things around the world. So to you for your opening statement. And I know you were having a little bit of difficulty in terms of hearing and the sound. If you think it's been fixed, please, we would love to hear from you now. You're still muted.
Yeah.
Yes.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay,
we
awesome.
can hear you just fine.
The host will not let me unmute myself. So thank you so much for inviting me to this panel and involving me in this effort. I wanted to start by just congratulating SSLC on the tracker. It's a really important contribution to this space. And I particularly like how you're tracking just how freedom of expression is being censored and repressed across a number of mediums. I think sometimes when you work in this space for a while, we can get really zeroed in at looking at like online content and censorship of online content. But really, it's important to understand how freedom of expression is under threat across different mediums. And that's very much a trend that I think this tracker is showing, and that we at GNI have been seeing And so maybe I thought in my opening remarks, I would just start by giving an overview of GNI and how we work on freedom of expression and work to protect it globally. So we are a multi-stakeholder initiative that brings together companies, civil society, academics, and investors working towards protecting freedom of expression and privacy worldwide. Something that is unique about our organization is that our company members undergo an assessment into how they are protecting freedom of expression and privacy through their policies and their practices with respect to government mandate. And so when they get a mandate or a government request for access to personal information or removal of content, what policies and processes do they have in place to protect the user's rights? In this work, we also do a lot of policy work. And so we are responding to actions that we see that threaten freedom of expression, so network shutdowns, removal of content, etc., and then responding to legislation that we see as problematic, that might have provisions that ultimately will result in the suppression of freedom of expression. We also develop a number of tools to help both civil society and companies in pushing back against overly broad government mandate. And I just wanted to highlight a few of these, particularly because I think they're important and useful in the context of thinking about protecting freedom of expression. So one is what we call the Across the Stack tool. And there, what it's doing is trying to map out human rights due diligence questions across different types of companies in the tech stack. Because really, if you look at questions of freedom of expression and government mandates, it's going to sit a little bit differently for a telecom company versus a social media company. Telecom company might be getting like a network shutdown, and that's how they're interacting with it, while a social media company might be getting a request for removal of information, and a cloud service provider will interact with it a little bit differently. And so we're trying to bring more nuance into understanding how issues of freedom of expression intersect with different aspects of the tech stack. Another tool and brief that we've put together is just a human rights approach to content moderation. And this is advocating for best practices when governments look to moderate content to make sure it's in line with international human rights standards. And lastly, I wanted to highlight a tool that we have tracking regulation globally called that intersects with freedom of expression and privacy. And so I can drop these in the chat, but those are different ways in which we are working to protect and enable freedom of expression and privacy by bringing together different stakeholders, both through a multi-stakeholder accountability mechanism, but also creating trusted and safe space for dialogue and discussion on some really tough and challenging issues.
Thank you, Elonnai. For those of you who aren't familiar, please do take a look at each of our panelists' affiliation, whether it's the leaflet of Ms. Jaising, whether it is, well, with Ravi, it's a little more complicated. You'll have to read a lot of books, but he'll make more money if you actually read those books, so which we would be happy about. But Rachita's Sanitary panels, which is a source of constant entertainment, plus makes you think in the very much the category of the kind of commentary on news that we would want. For IFEX, which tells you so much about so many organizations that it becomes very inspiring, and for GNI in terms of a very, very unique structure of this multi-stakeholderism, which everybody likes to talk about, but only Elonnai and other people who work in know how complicated it is. I'm going to move to Rachita and Ravi. These questions are for you. The Statsy, you held a competition for the best political joke. The first prize was 15 to 20 years, but that was East Germany. What I think books, satire, art, they are the soul of the society. I wish they would stop making generative AI models to write all that and make them do other tedious work for us, because art should be left to human beings. But anyway, art on the whole functions as a private sphere of freedom, which is not subject to or susceptible to the normal rules of the society. How are you continuing to create and also encourage and work when the conditions are so hostile? And what are the everyday challenges you are facing, you're seeing other people who are facing, And how does one continue to ensure that you can be who you are while the society does what it does? And Rachita and then Ravi, please.
Yeah, I think like satire, first of all, I don't think AI is going to come after satire, because I think it's you need to have very human emotions in order to do satire properly. So I am not worried about AI doing satire well. So I'm not too worried about that right now. But yeah, satire is like the first thing that authoritarians come after, because it is the thing that takes away their omnipotence. It makes them human. It makes them it makes them a matter of, or like it makes them the subject of laughter, which is why I think satire scares them a lot. And when governments start coming after satire, it's like a warning bell. And because once they start coming after satire, they will come after everything else. So it has been difficult. So as I mentioned briefly, there is a contempt of court case against me that's been going on since 2020 in the Supreme Court. And there are 3 comics under question there. And there are continuing forms of harassment for the political artist community outside as well. So I think the only thing that we sort of can count on is support from each other. So support in community and support in standing up for whoever is being targeted next. I think that's how we move forward. And also, I mean, there is so much to make fun of. I feel bad when I don't make a joke, it would make me more anxious if I didn't make a joke, even if it put me in danger. So I think between that and the community, we're able to go strong.
I think it's just very heartening to see that human beings have that resilience to continue to do what they believe in doing despite the hostile environment. That's what Ms. Jaising said. Well, we have the rule of law and we have that power. And that's what you're saying, that it would be more difficult if you didn't make a joke. Ravi, the Americans love to lecture the world about how things should be done and human rights and blah, blah, blah. Everything has, as they would say, that everybody knows now the truth, what it is. But book bans are not new. How have you been dealing? What has changed? What's going on? How are you keeping, as the keeper of our soul of the society, what's going on here?
The fun part is actually we get kind of a stay or injection against our books actually once in a while. I mean, every now and then actually. And I'll tell you the fun part actually. Once actually there was one of our books were banned actually by a court, and these people had given cases across, like they go and give a case in Bihar or somewhere else rather than in Kerala actually. Similarly, they have given cases across. And finally, we requested all the cases to be consolidated into one court, and they agreed. And that book is still under injunction, actually. I mean, we have not been able to release that. And one of the things the judge or the court has said is actually, why don't you go on a compromise with the other party? I mean, that's how the court sees it, actually. I mean, it's quite funny, actually, And the same book, actually, I had stone pelting at my house, actually. I mean, while I was sleeping, they came to the bookshop, they burned books. Once, actually, in another book, The Case of Mustache, we had about 150 cops guarding our office with water cannons and across Kerala thing. It's this kind of things happens, actually, even in Kerala. That's why I would say even in Kerala, we call ourselves 100% literate, but when it comes to religion and politics, actually, these people go quite radical with what they believe in. And with the case of Mustache, I mean, there's one story I would like to say. I mean, that the case of Mustache, since it's a recent, actually, it's very recent, as in 2018. I mean, it's not too. When this was serialized in a magazine, it's in a magazine owned by one of the major newspaper publishing company. They were forced to withdraw the serialization of the novel, actually. And the next thing happened is actually, I mean, we can understand, I mean, the the kind of pressure they have. But I mean, we never thought, I mean, such a newspaper will ever withdraw something because of the kind of pressure, you know. But the next thing is actually one of the directors of that public limited company coming forward and saying that, I mean, I also feel there is something derogatory in the novel. I mean, this is funny, actually. This is how in the last few years, actually, the whole thing has evolved into. So I mean, like, it's a case with, I mean, in another instance, actually, we have had, when we were doing the literature festival, actually, we had comments of saying that if you can withdraw the festival director, then we will cooperate or we will let you go, I mean, kind of thing. I mean, so I mean, whatever we speak, I mean, the kind of people who come for the literature festival, the speakers, actually, all this actually comes under scrutiny in the recent past. I mean, so it was more of right for a long time. I mean, right wing as in right, actually. I mean, and at times, actually, I mean, the whole phenomena has come into the local regions as well, actually. I mean, it may not be the same kind of government, actually. Even the other governments, actually, you call them the left or the center or extreme right or whatever. I mean, they all use the same metaphor, actually, to, sort of put a thing on the book, actually. I mean, or even whenever you need support, they will say that you shouldn't have done that. This is the kind of thing we hear every now and then. I mean, one good thing happened with the 2018 publishing of Mustache, actually. Two things, actually. The author was quite reluctant to publish that as a book after he was threatened by these extremists. So we sort of, what do you call it? We sort of mentored, or we sort of advised him for over 2 days, actually finally agreed to publish the book in Malayalam. If that wasn't the case, actually, even the self-censorship, I want to talk on the self-censorship. Self-censorship would have happened in the literary landscape of Kerala. I mean, Kerala is where all kind of books get published. You can publish any kind of radical kind of content, actually, but it will never get questioned, actually. But this is one area, actually, we got all the authors united, actually, to ensure that, I mean, there's no self-censorship happens. Otherwise, we had a couple of meetings. We have been giving courage to all the other authors, saying that, I mean, this should not be a case you should be taking to where, I mean, you should be backing out from the thing. Because we had hell of a lot of protesters, actually. When we had the cops, actually, we had a huge rally coming in from the other side, actually, against the book. Then we had circulars from one of the communities here, the Hindu caste community. One of the communities gave a circular that not to read any books by Deecee books. That's the most funniest part, actually. I mean, it is not about Deecee books, or it's not about the thing. I mean, you're talking about the fiction. So these kind of things also happen. I mean, there's never been in the past. And you have also mentioned, Mishi, I've also mentioned about the WhatsApp. This is one of the probably the most popular forums, actually. I mean, where people use it as a mechanism to, against all this, the kind of publishing we do or something. I mean, there's a campaign called Ready to Wait, actually, against Shabarimala. Also, when we did a book by one of the tribal person talking about the whole origin of the Shabarimala temple. So the next campaign was on Ready to Wait, actually. I mean, it's quite scary, actually, at times.
So, Kerala, for those of you who don't know, 31 million people, small state.
Yes.
Indian numbers are always small. And the most literate state in the country. Americans always find it very fascinating that communists can be in power, because in America, it's just like, oh my God. However, to your point about censorship often it finds itself into the ridiculousness of what it tries to do. And you are sometimes left to laugh at the ridiculousness of it. but if it were not that tragic, one would be able to dismiss it. I'm going to turn to Rachel. Rachel, book bans are accelerating everywhere. We're already seeing how the technology companies behave. What are the global trends in the media censorship and repression? We used to think of censorship as a feature of authoritarian regimes. But how do we see that in view of so-called democracies or electoral autocracies? What are they doing? And how is their approach a little different from the rest of the world? And feel free to talk about the self-appointed policeman, which is us in the south of you as your neighbors.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question because I'm not these days, I'm not so sure there is such a significant difference. And in some ways, I feel like, one is learning from the other. I think there's been definitely a rise of violence, both online and offline, against journalists and activists across the globe. And in both cases, we're seeing little progress in holding violators to account. Although I think as we've been hearing from all of our esteemed panelists, that that is so important. And as you say, Mishi, the members of IFEX at the national level are doing what they can to take these violations forward and to try and have them prosecuted. And I think perhaps in certain contexts, you're seeing more direct attacks. But I think something that is used as a tool in both democracies and perhaps more authoritarian regimes is a rise of lawfare and slaps against journalists and others, with laws criminalizing dissent, veiled as terrorism, extremism, and increasing prosecution of protests through private laws. I think that has been another space where we have, I think across the globe, seen expression being used, protests as a form of expression, and a really hard crackdown in terms of laws coming across, I think, from everything from, the UK to many other countries. I think on the positive, which is sometimes very hard to find, we've also seen increased resistance to these practices through monitoring and reporting of the practice, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of different ways of tracking that, like SFLC's tracker, and a new series of anti-SLAPP laws that have been brought in. And I think also the work that groups are doing together to come together and to try to push back. An interesting example in Europe is a coalition that has formed against SLAPPs called CASE. And they've brought together over 200 organizations who have advocated for a change in EU law to prevent these types of strategic lawsuits. So I think that's where we're seeing the ways in which governments, both electoral autocracies or even democracies, I think we're really seeing, and I think we're also seeing the way in which private actors, and Elonnai could probably speak much more to this, but there's been a particularly notable lack of transparency of content moderation by social media companies, and the complicity of telecoms with states in internet shutdown. So I'd say that's another trend that we're seeing that isn't just specific to the media, but is definitely one that we're seeing across the board that is not specific to authoritarian regimes.
Thank you. For those of you who follow SFLC's work or do not, please do look at a project called the internetshutdowns.in. It tracks the internet shutdowns in India. India has the distinguished record of always being #1 in the world since we started to track these shutdowns from 2012. Unfortunately, when we start projects, our goal is that projects become redundant, but it hasn't happened, and it continues. One of the things which I do want to ask Elonnai, but before that, I want to ask you, Rachel, is the Western world always loved to lecture the rest of the global majority to say, human rights, very bad. Now they have decided that their own children are their enemies because their children don't agree with the politics they have been propagating. What is happening outside the US Congress? I'm actually wondering what rules did I break for X, but I do know that I retweeted what the Jewish Voices for Peace was saying, what Kamala Harris campaign was saying, but I'm seeing what I'm looking at is that there is a big change in how free expression is being handled, whether it is in Germany, whether it is in the UK or it's in the US. We're also seeing a lot of censorship, which is being now fueled by private bodies, parents objecting to school boards, don't teach this, take away this book from the library, and banning books about sexual violence or LGBTQ plus topics, etc. So that shift does have an impact on how the rest of the world thinks. So if you and Elonnai can speak to that, that would be great. And Elonnai, especially the question I wanted to ask was the social media platform companies in the guise of content moderation have started to moderate way more than actually letting any content flow unless it fits those whatever they would like it to be. And how are you seeing those challenges, and how are various entities trying to negotiate that? So Rachel first, you, Elonnai, then, and if Ravi and Rachita, you feel that you want to jump in, please go ahead as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say that especially the impact it's had on the work of IFEX members and IFEX network is it's made it extremely difficult to find any levers of pressure because or any real kind of authority. And I think that has shown the true value of the network as an entity, as a space to come together, to exchange, how we're working to share tactics with each other, to provide a learning and exchange space where we can all discuss what are these things that we're facing, because it's not so, as you say, it's not anymore, oh, this bastion of free expression, the United States of America. I think that really doesn't exist anymore. And I think that one of the ways in which the network has really demonstrated the value that it brings to the space is that in being together as a network and working with allies outside of the network, we are finding, I think, new ways to push forward, to be able to take these issues and to really show the strength of the organizations like SFLC working at the national level, and the ways in which that they have had success in moving things forward. And I think that has really changed even the way in which we look at affecting and having an impact on the situation.
Elonnai?
Thank you. The host immunity. So, Mishi, I think what you were talking about is definitely a trend that we're seeing. Like when I first started working in this space, it was very much like freedom of expression 100%, right? And then suddenly it felt like this whole sector woke up and said, wait, hold on, there's a lot of harms online, and we have to do something about it. And not just like civil society and the sector, but governments as well. And so what we're seeing globally is that there are a number of moves from governments to regulate online harms, like online safety bill, online harm bills, etc. And I think the impact of that is that globally, a number of measures that could be seen as well-intentioned in practice are actually measures that are having harmful impacts on freedom of expression. And I wanted to highlight some of the key trends that I'm seeing emerge in these different regulations globally. So one is that we're definitely seeing short time frames for removal, right? Like requirements for 24-hour removal on notice for platforms. We see this in FDG in Germany, Australia Online Safety Act, the Canada Online Harms Bill. It's been replicated in legislation in Vietnam, Pakistan, India, and Indonesia. So that like short time frame for removal is a pretty popular approach that we see governments taking to try to get the content offline of what they see harmful content offline as soon as possible. Another trend that we're seeing is just legislation incorporating broad categories of content that should not be online. And this is often coupled with requirements for proactive monitoring from companies. And so moving away from companies receiving requests for removal of content to companies now proactively monitoring to make sure there's no harmful or illegal or unlawful content online. I think some other trends that we see is that regulation is being applied to a broad range in types of companies. And sometimes that regulation is not adequate or fit appropriately to how the companies actually works, and it can result in the company taking overly broad action on content when they're trying to be in compliance with this regulation. And similar to that, we see regulation targeting like different sizes of companies. And sometimes when it hits the smaller companies, that can also lead to overly broad removal as they work to try to be in compliance. And it also can disincentivize things like encryption practices, etc. Some other trends include unclear provisions on liability, responses to children's safety online, I think is resulting in a lot of actions that could be seen as overly broad, putting pressure on encryption, safeguards like that. And then I think another trend that we see is that the role of the regulator across jurisdictions is being enhanced, right? They're having more enforcement powers, more ways to try to enforce these rules, which can be useful, but that also needs oversight and accountability. And there is a concern about politicization of enforcement of these different regulations. And I think in many ways, what we've seen in Europe with the DSA is a very innovative regulation, and there's a number of mechanisms in there that are really important for platform accountability. We've also seen actions like the Thierry Breton letters and kind of loose statements about potentially removing content. And it raises questions about enforcement and the impact of regulation and legislation that is meant to enhance platform accountability, but in practice could result in negatively impacting freedom of expression. And then I also wanted to highlight that I think so there's national level regulation, but there's also a number of international processes happening right now, right? We've got the Global Digital Compact, UNESCO is putting out guidelines around platform regulation and platform governance. There's the UN Cybercrime Treaty, and a number of these trends are replicated in the text of these international processes. And I think something that we're seeing also, which is concerning, is that the language around international human rights standards and the commitment to that in these international texts is weakening, as is multi-stakeholder and a commitment to multi-stakeholder processes and approach, etc. And the impact of that is that if that's weakened at a high international level, it can open a door to justify practices that might not be in line with international human rights standards, including practices in relation to content and speech online. And it means that we won't be taking a multi-stakeholder approach to finding solutions, which I really think is critical, and to bring in the different perspectives to try to understand where is that line between awful but lawful and actually illegal, harmful content. So those are just some of the trends that we're seeing globally in regulation. So it's not limited to just authoritarian regimes. I think that the challenges that all jurisdictions are struggling with.
Thank you. I'm sure India gives you enough information and data to add to your trends. I will say one thing which has stayed true. In 2010, Eben Moglen, who is the founder of the SFLC New York, said in a speech that Mr. Zuckerberg has attained an unenviable record. He has done more harm to the human race than anybody else his age. It's 2024. I think that statement still holds true. And whether he can put a chain around his neck and find Mr. Trump's fist badass or not, he keeps continuing to do that harm, which just talks more about how the platform companies play a role here. I do want to ask one thing, which on I think when we talk about a paradigm shift, about these questions have to shift. That how we think about these categories. I think it would be remiss to not mention this. And because Elonnai, you did talk about the harms, and Rachita did mention about the DMs one receives and what one sees, how people talk about. Why should we have all this freedom of press and free speech? People are weaponizing it all the time. There is online gender-based violence, which is now slipping over in offline world all the time. We've used words now to mostly label other human beings or categories of people. And then we become online mobs and really try to actually go after people. Whether in India it is about all this urban Naxal or something, all of this is now even finding its way into legislation in some state level media. Why should we have all of this? Why shouldn't we have all the controls? And didn't we elect all these governments to actually take care of us? And are they doing their jobs to take care of us? One sentence each from all of you, and then we will just open the floor for questions. I'll start with Rachita, go to Ravi, Rachael, and Elonnai, and then we'll open it to questions, please. And if you can be brief about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think everything can be a double-edged sword, like social media, for example. Having free speech on social media will be a double-edged sword. What we can do to remedy it being misused, obviously it needs the support of these social media companies, which is very difficult to happen. But in an ideal world, we would be able to hold social media companies accountable to what is being said and what is being done using their platforms. But I don't think that shutting down free speech is going to be a solution to that. I think we need to learn how to moderate the consequences from social media into real life or into legislature in more constructive ways rather than question the premise.
Ravi?
Actually, the kind of pressure the art and the literature community is getting actually to do the propaganda kind of writing or the creative, art, that's causing a lot of problem. For example, like Kerala Story, actually. I mean, that's a classical example of that, actually. Making a film like Kerala Story, actually, and saying that it's all fiction. At the end, initially they say it's all facts, and then they say it's all about fiction. And second is actually the propaganda thing is coming in a big way in the the fiction writing as well. I mean, that's quite scary, actually. And there are publishers, mainstream publishers, who align to these kind of propaganda stories, and actually, in a subtle way or other, they try to infiltrate that into the public forums like literature festivals and all. We need to have this as the best speaker kind of thing. I mean, those kind of things. Second is actually what I've seen is on the clearances, actually. I mean, that has more to do with the literature festivals and all we do, actually. Across the globe, actually, the political clearance, sending authors from here to another country or to here, the conditions they are put forth, actually, is, I mean, they're under radar, actually. I mean, who can come in and who can't, who cannot be in, actually, in what's the kind of visas. I mean, I agree, this has to be on a speaking visa, but I mean, there are restrictions of bringing people into the country, or in many countries. I mean, India is one of the examples, actually, for that. I mean, that's a scary part, actually, I feel, in the publishing world.
Thank you. Rachael?
I mean, I think as a network that defends and promotes freedom of expression, I would definitely say that there is value. And I really loved what Ms. Jaising said at the beginning about the fact that it is our voice is our tool, that it's the one thing that we actually still have, even if we don't have always the power and the money and the. So I think I would love to reiterate her comment and that she made earlier.
Great, Elonnai.
Yeah, and I think I would just add onto what everyone else has shared that I think in many ways, like these platforms that we now interact on have really evolved from what they were originally intended to be, private messaging platforms. Now they are in many ways hosting democracies, and I think that evolution and the way they were used, it happened, and it didn't necessarily happen with thought behind design, and that's how they were going to be used. And so I think going forward, need to be thoughtful, very thoughtful about the platforms and the services and the safeguards that we do design in tools like human rights due diligence and the impact of those. Tools like human rights due diligence and risk assessment can help us think through that. And secondly, I wanted to say that I think there needs to be more thought about remedy. So we have a lot of harms emerging online related to speech, and some of those can be, at the level of just having your speech removed. Some of them can be much deeper into physical violence, etc. But as we identify the harms, thinking of adequate remedy that individuals can take is another area that we should be focusing on.
Thank you. I wasn't being flippant asking that question. I think what happens is that in conversations when we are bombarded with the harms, and as we see mainstream media align with certain kind of a narrative which each government wants to encourage, one is forced to reconsider and at least think about what we have taken for granted. So, but as always, I'm very pleased what you all have said. I'm going to open the floor for questions. If you have questions, and please raise your hands or unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and then ask questions. And chat was earlier disabled, but now I think we are happy to have your questions there. Mostly we disabled because we love free speech so much. No, that's not the reason. What we wanted to do was just keep the conversation going and not disturb the flow of it. But please post your questions in the chat if you haven't already, or please unmute yourself and feel free to just jump in and ask questions to the panelists. Yes, Saeed Haroon, then Nick Williams. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So this is for Elonnai, and we've been looking a lot of influence of digital censoring when it comes to political platforms and political censorship, and its consonance with the fundamental right of free expression. So taking into the self-censoring mechanisms and the censorship that takes place through the government, how do you think the integrity and fairness of elections are in place? And I mean, if you can speak a bit on that.
Okay, Haroon, I think you asked a question which Elonnai didn't approve of, so she has decided to leave the meeting for now. I think she would join back, but I'm not seeing her right now. Elonnai, are you still here? Let's wait for her to rejoin. And Nick Williams, your question, please.
Hi.
Unless it's to Elonnai, and then we can wait.
It's just to the panel as a whole, so happy for anyone to answer. So hi, my name is Nick Williams from Index on Censorship. We're a fellow IFEX member alongside FSLC. It's just a question about the panel, because I think there's an interesting development in India, the use of regulation to expand state control over online and offline speech and broadcast. And we saw with the Broadcast Services Regulation Bill that the latest draft hasn't been published yet, but there's been a lot of reporting today which suggests quite an expansive use of the regulation to control speech. And we've seen this previously in an early draft with conversations around the Digital India bill as well. And just what the panel's thought on this approach by India to create these very expansive, ambitious laws that redefine the regulatory space. Because I think we're seeing this development of regulation, sort of very expansive regulation that can exert a significant amount of control, which in a lot of other countries, you don't see it manifesting this way. So I think it's a very interesting approach that the Indian government's taken to regulation and censorship. So what the panel think about this sort of tactic, and whether we need to be worried about it being sort of used by other states as well.
Mishi, I think you're best placed to answer that, actually.
I would have loved others to see. So Nick, great question. I think there is they have seen enough success here in not only twisting the social media companies through subordinate legislation, which is where executive has complete control, but they have also seen that revamping of the law, considering the numbers the ruling party had, at least until before this election, made if you can make something legal, then it becomes much easier to enforce. And whether it is people like Elon Musk who say, oh, we love free speech, but we will still abide by law. And that's how becomes the good excuse. So once you have something made into the legislation, it obviously travels down and trickles down there. We're seeing it actually across various legislation that India is coming up with. Broadcom bill, telecommunications bill, IT rules, IMB ministry. We're seeing everywhere all of this stuff creeping in. And to the second part of it about duplication, I think most countries learn from each other. And when it comes to censorship and the bad practices, that has a tendency to actually spread much faster than the good practices. Because the good practices, they can dismiss to say, oh, our country is different, our conditions are different. But for the bad practices, they're always like, that looks very good. They did this. Now, how do I get to that? That's why you're seeing in Pakistan recently, they've been testing a firewall. And everybody's very curious. India has had a very, very long envy about the Chinese are very successful technologically, but how do they also control everybody? It just, there is a little problem in India, which is called the constitution, as well as its public and the elections. So I think you are rightly picking on the trend. And that is happening because that's how the numbers were in favor. But as Ms. Jaising said, lawyers are working as well as now with the composition of the parliament looking a little different. Hopefully things would be different. But the usual challenges still stay, whether it is about pre-consultation, whether about who's invited for which kind of workshop in terms of before a legislation comes out. We're struggling with all of it. And litigation is not cheap and it's not swift. And we are keeping political prisoners without bail for over 1,400 days. So you can imagine how this gets fair. I don't think I have a good answer, but I will say that bad practices will definitely be copied around the world, whether it is the 54 countries in Africa or Latin America or Southeast Asia. But our friends in Europe, UK, and US are not there. What to Rachel's point, they're doing exactly the same things. They want to pretend to say whatever they always say, but everybody is now looking at it. And that losing that moral high ground actually does not give us any examples to show also. Other questions from the panel? Oh, for the panel, please. There is a question from Madhu Ratnayak. If I'm butchering your last name, please correct me. She sends greetings from, or he sends greetings, I do not know, or they send greetings from Sri Lanka. They say, thank you for this insightful session. I would like to know how the world is going to tackle freedom of expression with the increasing trends of deep fake and misinformation / disinformation trends fueled by generative AI. Thank you. Their question is very, very relevant. Any of you who wants to answer, please go ahead. Rachita, Rachel, Ravi, anybody? I think Elonnai is having some technical issues, so she's sending a message. But anyone who wants to talk about the fun things about misinformation and disinformation with Gen AI, and how does that impact free speech and expression?
I mean, so can you hear me?
Yes, Elonnai is back. Elonnai, we were talking about the increasing trend of deepfake, misinformation, disinformation trends as fueled by Gen AI and impact on free speech. And there was also a question earlier for you on elections, but I'll let Harun repeat that question. But if you want to address the Gen AI question, please go ahead.
I mean, I would just say when it comes to thinking about misinformation and disinformation in Gen AI, of course, there are a number of concerns that have been raised about the way in which generative AI can, one, allow for an increase of disinformation and misinformation to be created by a broader range of actors because it can democratize the ability, and it lowers the barrier to accessing and using that kind of technology to create disinformation. I think there's concerns about just the scale at which it will be able to be spread, and the inability for individuals to really distinguish between what is authentic and inauthentic content. And you see governments and companies trying to take a number of steps, like watermarking content, making sure that it's clearly labeled, that it's been created by an AI bot or something like that. You know, I think it's time still needs to, you know, for us to understand the actual impact of generative AI on disinformation and misinformation. And at the same time, I think there are a number of voices saying, well, you know, we still need to get to the root causes, the societal causes of disinformation and misinformation. And we can't just focus on the technology that we think is amplifying this problem. But really a holistic and sustainable solution is one that looks at what's at the root, and it goes from there. And there's a ton of literature and work out there about addressing root causes of disinformation and misinformation, and it really needs to be very much an ecosystem approach, from fact checkers to counter speech to education in schools, etc.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm gonna mostly in the interest of time wrap up, but I would really like if you all could have anything to close your remarks, and I'm gonna go to each of you. And Rachel, you'll have, I'll start with you, then Ravi, then Elonnai, and Rachita, if you could then help us close the session.
Thanks, Mishi. I think I would love to end on a positive, starting again with thanking you for having us here today, and for the incredible work that you do. It really is a privilege to be a part of that and to support and contribute in some small way. At our recent in-person convening of members, we talked about how this global network of IFEX and its allies can respond effectively to these challenges of the current situation and future. And I think they identified a need for greater solidarity and more collective action, less competition and more commitment, strategic work with donors to ensure there's a shared understanding of what is needed, because they are a very unfortunate, important stakeholder in all of this. And I think making sure we have the time and resources to do the work, and concrete ways to measure our impact. And I think this is what gives me hope. The incredible activists in this network, and the work they're doing at their organizations, including all of the colleagues at SFLC, and really the benefit that they see in doing it together. So thank you for having me here, and looking forward to definitely continuing this conversation.
Thank you very much. Ravi?
I think I also feel there's a hope, actually. with more and more writers actually coming up front and discussing the topic. I mean, they have been silenced, or they have been rather silent actually in the last few years. I think post the recent elections in India, actually, I mean, I've seen more people actually just coming out of the closet. I mean, like, from the whole thing actually, from the self-censorship, which has been a major thing we have been facing as a sector. The people were not willing to write on many things, actually, even the non-fiction part, actually. People were just, I mean, the kind of people you used to see that who criticize a lot of things, just went silent for ages, actually. I mean, be it for 3 or 5 years, actually, they've gone totally silent. Now they're just back into action. I think this is a positive sign, actually, which we have been advocating, actually. But I think they were all waiting for this moment of actually being more free to speak now, actually. I mean, I don't know, it's the case when in the US in the coming elections, you never know. I mean, like, the Trumps and the...
Okay, we'll see that. Thank you very much. This is the power of vote. And Elonnai? Okay, I do not know if she's still here. Elonnai, are you still with us? Okay, Rachita, I do not know. Rachita, you have the final word.
Yeah, I would echo what has already been said and say there is power in collective action and community. And I think, like, at the end of the day, that's what we will keep coming back to.
Great. My deepest gratitude to all of you for getting up early or staying up late or giving up all that you are doing. There are many other things you could be doing and contributing, but collective action, less competition, more support for each other is what we are all aiming for. That's why this is a community effort. We obviously try to be the core here to start something, but as Gyan said, data is available for everyone to see, take action, do something with it. That's what would make it a success. I'm gonna turn it over to Gyan. Thank you very much for all of you for joining us. Gyan, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mishi, and our panelists. Now, I invite our legal director, Mr. Prashant Sugathan, to give a vote of thanks.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. That was indeed a wonderful session. Coming to free speech and the whole idea behind the tracker. So, Rabindranath Tagore, who has a unique distinction of authoring the national anthems of two countries, brought about our country awakening to a heaven of freedom where knowledge is free. Unfortunately, we have had violations of this cherished freedom to express happening with increased frequency over the years. The session that we are having today is the first of a series of events that we will be hosting on the theme of free speech. Our Independence Day falls next month, and it is indeed time to celebrate the vision of men and women who toiled hard for this freedom. SFLC.in will be celebrating the whole of August 2024 as Freedom Month. Talking about freedom, it is important that our executive focuses more on the resolve of securing liberty of thought and expression to citizens that we made when we gave ourselves the Constitution of India, than on symbolic naming of structures and laws made by colonial rulers. That indeed, I believe, will be a true tribute to our freedom fighters. I express our sincere gratitude to Senior Advocate Indira Jaising, Rachael, Elonnai Hickok, Ravi, Deecee, Rachita, Taneja, and Mishi Choudhary for an in-depth session that brought in focus various challenges like issues that Ravi faced when it comes to book publishing and risks, including physical risks faced by artists and journalists, and even lawyers, as highlighted by Ms. Indira Jaising. Ravi talked about literature festivals and its challenges, and ironic as it may seem, SFLC.in had to pull out of a session on book bans when the book festival organizer wanted to decide on the speakers and in a way censor the session. SFLC.in is built on the ethos of the free software movement, where knowledge is shared freely for everyone to use and improve upon. This tracker has been inspired by multiple such efforts, including that of the Free Speech Collective in India, the Global Freedom of Expression Project of Columbia University, and the Free Speech Project of the Georgetown University. We thank these efforts and look forward to collaborating with such projects both in India and across the world. The tracker has been built by efforts of a number of individuals from the core SFLC.in team and external contributors. I thank our SFLC.in team behind the tracker, Radhika Jalani, our former colleague, and our external contributors. Name them Shefali Jain, Vishnu Prasad VS, Vinayak Agarwal, and Harshik. I also extend my thanks to the artists, writers, and journalists who have made our life richer and have often faced the wrath of the state and other actors who attack free speech. For this project, we are currently tracking 4 issues, and we hope to expand this tracker to cover more areas of free speech violation. This project is intended to be a community effort, and we do welcome collaborations and contributions from organizations and individuals. We thank everyone who has joined us today for the event and look forward to your continued support for our future events. Thank you all.
Thank you all for your valuable contributions, and thank you to the audience for taking your time out on a weekday. We hope to continue this critical conversation beyond today.
Yeah, that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. And please continue to engage. Don't try to reach me on Twitter, but every other place I am still available. If you really like me, you will know my contact details. But SFLC.in will continue to work on this, send us more information, criticism, feedback, and thank you again, and have a wonderful evening, morning, wherever